Our first speaker is Dr. James Watson. Dr. Watson did his training in the University of Chicago, the University of Indiana, and then he went to England and collaborated with Francis Crick. And the two of them, as young scientists, went after a very important and challenging question. What is the structure of DNA, the genetic material on chromosomes that is responsible for all of our traits that we inherit from our parents? And with their studies and with the information in the literature and some collaboration, they discovered that DNA existed as a pair, two strands of polynucleotides wrapped around each other in the way of a double helix. A very important observation. Those helices were bound to each other through nucleotide bonds, adenine to guanine and cytosine to thymidine, and that provided all sorts of subsequent clues, not only to them, but to other investigators around the world, as to how DNA would come apart, how would it replicate, how would enzymes regulate the production of DNA, and the messenger RNAs that will peel off from these to code for various proteins. It led to the codon identification of the triplets for amino acids, and a whole series of things. And for this remarkable work, in 1962, the two of them shared the Nobel Prize along with Maurice Wilkins for having identified the helical structure of DNA. This launched a revolution in genetics and DNA technology, molecular biology, replication of messenger RNA and recombinant technology for the birth of the biotech industry in the late 1970s. So it's had an incredible impact. Today, it's been possible with very rapid technology to fingerprint the genetic sequences of individuals, identify genetic diseases, look for new targets, and develop new drugs. And it has incredible potential application. When Watson finished his collaboration with Crick, he returned to the US. He went to Harvard on the faculty for a period of time, and then was invited to become the director of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories. The Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories at the time was in its infancy, just getting going, and Jim converted that into one of the premier research institutions in the world. It's a remarkable place, a lot of talented people. He's now been there 39 years as its president and director, and for the last few years as president emeritus. He's an effective fundraiser. He comes to Houston periodically scouting for money, I think. Since in the 10 years that I've been here in Houston, Jim's been in town several times. We welcome you back, Jim. It's a pleasure to have you. He has numerous awards, of course, presidential medals. Time magazine called him as one of the most clever minds in the past century. Lots of accolades. I don't think we need to go into all of them, but let's hear from Dr. James Watson. Jim.
When I helped start the Human Genome Project in 1988, I decreed that, or suggested, that 3% of the money, it was an off-the-cuff remark at a press conference, but everyone liked it, that 3% of our money should be devoted to ethical issues which would arise out of the Human Genome Project. And over the, and then we had a hearing in front of then Representative Gore, who said it should be 5%, and the Department of Energy had not thought about ethics, but Senator Gore said, "Why don't you have an ethics program?" So they said, "Yes, sir," and so we've had these ethics programs. On the whole, I think the money has been pretty badly spent. Really because the new genetics which would bring forth these ethical issues hadn't arrived. But now with the actual ability to sequence DNA, and as you many of you are aware, in early June I came to Houston for the unveiling of my own genome. With such knowledge, real ethical questions arise. You know, a simple one. Should have asked my children before I said yes. Well, I didn't. So, and so on. But I'll come back to that at the end. But so I welcome the opportunity to come here and open your series. And in a way, the sort of big problem behind almost all of this is the question of nature and nurture. To what extent are human attributes directly determined by our genes, and to what extent is our environment important? And in matters such as how tall you'll be, everyone sort of agrees that's largely genes if you get a good environment, that is, if you good nutrition. But on matters of particularly human things, our intelligence, our personalities, etc., there's much debate. And there's been a change, whereas after the rediscovery of Mendel's laws, there was great rush to give genetic explanations. And then after the horrors of the misuse of, or I should say, misuse of the lack of genetic knowledge by the eugenicists, and particularly in Nazi Germany, we more or less said, just don't think this way, concentrate on the environment. And we can't influence our genes, so let's see what we can do by the environment. Now we're getting a switch back, where on matters such as intelligence, I think there are thoughtful people who think that genes are actually involved. So at Harvard 25 years ago, Ed Wilson had a pail of water poured over his head for suggesting that genes influenced human behavior. Now, I think my own attitude changed the moment you have children. And you suddenly see they have personalities you just can't change at all. And where did they come from? And so I have, increasingly sort of thought that genes are quite important in sort of emotions and reactions to people. On the other hand, one's set of values, the way you go about life, is I think very much determined by your environment, and in my case came from my parents. And in thinking to lecture tonight, I thought, well, what were the important values I got from my parents? The first was reason. Never accept anything from revelation. It has to be observation or experiments to make you believe something. So it was a paramount emphasis on, reason, thinking logically. And I was very fortunate that in going to the University of Chicago, there was, they really cut you down if you were illogical. The second value was honesty. That is, when you say something, say what you think is correct, not what the people want you to say. And so I was encouraged to, not accept nonsense. When I came from, my father's Republican relatives. I mean, they were, their views on, Roosevelt were just wrong. And, and then the third value I want to emphasize is sort of fair play, which is sort of personal way of seeing social justice, that people should be treated with respect and not taken advantage of. And you can't have a coherent organization or university or anything unless people feel they're treated fairly. I remember I didn't feel I was treated fairly by Harvard. When I got the Nobel Prize, that was the one year they didn't increase my salary. An event I will never forget, because you just had to wonder, that shouldn't happen. And then the fourth value, which, my mother was very active in politics. She was precinct captain and a very, loyal Irish Democrat. Was responsibility. If you have the talents, help lead your society. And one of the problems right now I see about our scientific community is we've given up trying to lead anything. We don't go to Washington. We just think, I don't know why. Very depressing. That is, I think we have knowledge, and we shouldn't accept what we're getting from our government in Washington today. Anyways, those are the sort of values that, if I have the Nobel Prize, I should have my voice heard. But I mean, heard in the right way. Right, and then I've sort of said it to start with, but then, considering the Holocaust, I should say right away, I have no religious feelings whatsoever. And that came from my father, who was, raised to be a Republican and Episcopalian. And on my mother's side, I was, nominally raised to be an Irish Catholic. But, I couldn't stand, or particularly my father, he couldn't stand the Pope. He hated him. And why? Because Father Coughlin's magazine of hatred was found outside every Catholic church. That was vile. It was pro-Hitler, anti-Roosevelt, anti-English, and it was almost as if it was official doctrine. So my father had very strong views about how awful Hitler was. Yeah. So he didn't hate God, he just hated Cardinal Pacelli. And so I was taught that there is real evil in this world. It's not a relative matter. And Hitler was, just the worst we've ever seen. Okay. And, right, that's sort of my background. Strong, and I'll summarize it another way. I have a sort of academic autobiography. It came out and said, I was born in 1928 in Chicago into a family which believed in books, birds, and the Democratic Party. Another. So it was through being a sort of obsessive boy bird watcher that kindled my interest in biology. So I'll try and, quickly go through some slides which show what was eugenics like at Cold Spring Harbor. Someone asked me when I went to Cold Spring Harbor, did I know what it was? I said, yes. As if it was so tainted that, I shouldn't be It shouldn't go to an institution with that past. But when I went there in 1948, it was completely dominated by people from Europe who hated Hitler, and about half of whom were Jewish. So it was not the world that it was in 1920. And there was no mention whatsoever of eugenics. Now, it was just the war was ending. I think some of the full horrors were still to be discovered, but the interest was the gene. Now, if I go to... All right, this was what Cold Spring Harbor started, a little marine biology laboratory set up 2 years after Woods Hole, where the sort of dominant idea was really evolution. And one must remember that Charles Darwin was effectively a naturalist. So he went out and observed nature. And it was formerly a little whaling village. And this was the house of where Charles Davenport lived. No one ever talked about Davenport when I was there. He wasn't much fun, I think. Let's see, I'm doing, yeah. This is what it looked like in about 1910. And it was set up essentially to what they called experimental evolution, which was to breed plants and animals to learn the laws of heredity. Now, thank you. And the main building was where Charles Davenport had his office. No. Now, here's a picture of him. And the necessity of applying new knowledge to human affairs has been too evident to prevent us not to overlook it. Okay. And so in his first book, he looked at I-Core. Turned out not a very simple Mendelian thing. And then, there were human traits that really followed Mendelian heredity. And here's one where you can see the faces from 3 generations. And they all look pretty grim. And he wrote a book on eugenics. And they wanted to change the world for the better. Shall we now take the steps to dry up the streams that feed the torrent of defective and degenerate protoplasm? And so with the help of a great railway fortune, the Harrimans, and Mrs. Harriman, they set up a eugenic record office in 1910, and you can see very distinguished people like Alexander Graham Bell was its chairman. And this house was built, a rather classical house. It was offered for sale by its owner to the lab recently, but I wanted nothing of it. And the employees were largely women who took records. And they promoted fitter families. That is, people with good genes should have lots of children. And, if you could get close to these pictures, I wouldn't want any of them as my children. But I think, that's just the dress of the times. But there you can see family group from a long settled valley where much consanguineous marriage has taken place. That's you could say some hillbilly existence, where there was, I guess, what you could just call white trash. And here's one of aristocratic trash. interbreeding, which, finally Don caught one of the most despicable and unfortunate specimens of humanity in modern history. Okay. This comes from inbreeding between royalty. And so, Prince Charles isn't quite that far yet. And now, here's one with, a simple Mendelian disorder, the dread Huntington's disease. So that was, but here then is trying to show that, defective parents have only defective children, and you can see alcoholic, criminalistic, feeble-minded, tubercular. A man named Goddard, who at the end of his life said it was all crap. And this was pedigree of brilliancy combined with defect and melancholy. And so my guess that has a bipolar gene in that family. And then he observed that families had characteristics that seemed to pass down. And well, you can just read it. Quick and nervous movements, fondness for music, short stature, genial disposition, men of affairs rather than of professions. So it's again crap. But, on the other hand, you do see, father and son or father and grandson, and they do have some consistency in behavior. And then Davenport hired a former chicken breeder, Harry Lawland. And he came from nowhere in Missouri. And really, had no qualifications, but he effectively led the thing. And so this was the researchers on immigration. So they had the basic belief that our countries, which was largely from Northern Europe, it was being diluted, its values would be ruined by the criminalistic Italians coming in even greater numbers. So the idea was to keep America pretty much as it was. And so when the immigration, there was, at the time, New York City, our country was being flooded with immigrants because there are various crises in Europe. And so I think people were feeling, as many people feel today, with the border between the southern border of the United States. We're being flooded from people from Central and South America. And is that good? Will our country change in ways that we don't want? So I think the fact that people were worried about immigration rather than saying, oh, it's wonderful, is a natural human thing. You suddenly see people who are different. And so Lawland got that law passed. He was also the one who got, he was all for sterilization, but it wasn't his idea. The first sterilization was really, this was an idea which predated genetics. Or genetics in the Mendelian sense. And you can see that there was this changing pattern of suddenly we had no one from Southeast Europe, then we had lots. Okay. But some people began to realize that, they really weren't finding genes. And when they said there were genes for feeble-mindedness, they didn't have one. And the famous T.H. Morgan in 1925 really came and said, and he was initially one of the founders of the Eugenics Record Office, that really social reforms might be a much more effective way to help the country than trying to sterilization, I think, was made many people think twice. So one shouldn't, the genetics community basically turned against eugenics, or the Cold Spring Harbor variety, by 1925. And many people were very, active that it was just a pile of prejudice. Laughlin was very pleased when the Nazis essentially took over policies which had been advocated by socialists. And racial hygiene was a term not from the Nazis, but from socialists. And by race, he could have said, human society. It was the wrong word. But of course, the Germans, with their hatred, or the Nazis, with their hatred of the Jews, they went to it. And you can see the eugenicists thinking Germany is really doing what the Americans didn't have the courage to do. Okay. And so this was basically it. By the time the Nazis came into power, the majority of thoughtful American geneticists were against the Cold Spring Harbor promoted eugenics. I should say other places. The American Museum of Natural History has a great eugenics past, but they refuse to put any of their material on the web. We put everything there. Why not? So Cold Spring Harbor wasn't alone, but because of Laughlin and his more direct role, we get, the blame. Okay. So this is a picture of me when, at the time that I read Schrodinger's book, What is Life, and decided to go for the gene instead of observing birds. And I should say at that time, I took a course at the University of Chicago. It was basically nature versus nurture, mathematical tools for trying to dissect it. So it's an interest, and I should say, in all honesty, I did believe that some people were brighter than other people. And that it came partly from genes, and that the environment was that. Though I did make mistakes, in the sense I was worried about my future because I was a quarter Irish. And but then I realized that the curse of the Irish was a historical curse, not true today. It was not alcoholism or stupidity, but ignorance. So educated Irishman, and he's a good opponent. And that's what you find today. But, I was sort of wondering whether I had enough to, make it, given the dilution of my English and Scottish blood by the Irish. But this is what changed me, the book, What is Life? And then I was further changed when I went to, in a meeting in Italy, saw that X-ray photograph and realized that the three-dimensional structure of DNA was solvable or should be solvable. And, but I wouldn't be part of it if I hadn't met Francis Crick, who was then 35, and he actually was a war hero, but the Official Secrets Acts couldn't reveal it. He sank a lot of German minesweepers, his idea. So he was an important person. He never said it. But at that time, he just wanted to, the big thing to do was to show that we were as bright as Linus Pauling. And there's Linus and Sir Lawrence Bragg. Then we realized that there was a sort of third person into it, or fourth person, Rosalind Franklin, who was given the problem of DNA and had no passion for it, but she wanted to solve it. And I think what did her in was probably her genes. And to the extent, I think she probably was mildly autistic and really just couldn't see people's faces. And she was frightened by people. And these people often seem nasty because, they don't say the right thing. Anyways, it was very lucky for me that she should have solved it by the time I got into Cambridge. She had all the evidence if she had spent 5 minutes talking with Francis. That's all it taken. Anyways, that was her famous photograph, which when I first saw it, Rosalind told me that there was helices, that you shouldn't, the polling was wrong because DNA was not a helix. She changed her mind when she finally began to analyze it, but we didn't know it. And that was the base pairs for the answer, and it has not escaped our notice that you can separate the strands, and this is how the material was copied. This shows me coming to the United States to give the first big talk about the DNA structure at the Cold Spring Harbor Symposium. And that's a picture of us in Sweden. And I show it because of John Steinbeck. He was a hero of mine, his Grapes of Wrath, Henry Fonda in the movie. It symbolized all what I thought was good about the United States. It's, and then, we worked that out and then we got recombinant DNA. And, which, was the real tool that made the breakthrough by which we can not only make new forms of medicine, but we could isolate genes and we could really see a cancer gene and know what it was. But there was a big opposition from a group of young geneticists who called themselves Science for the People. And basically, they were left-wing. I've been brought up to hate the right wing, but right now I hate the left wing too. Perhaps, because they have no concern for the truth, ideology. And, that was our reaction to it. So there was an immense amount of just, silliness about, you can't really know something is dangerous until someone gets sick. It sounds cynical, but what recombinant DNA gave us a real way of getting the basic principles by which cancer arises. I won't go through that, but it took about 20 years and wouldn't have happened without recombinant DNA. But we wouldn't really know what cancer was until the Human Genome Project was done. And that's why I was enthusiastic to get it started, because I knew we had to do it for the sort of final assault on cancer, but I knew that at that time, that mental illness would be just completely impossible to understand until we found the genes. And until we knew the human sequence, it was going to be too difficult a task. And there that was a very strong emotion, because at that time, our son was, our eldest boy was very unstable, and now we realize, and it took a long, painful period to accept that it was schizophrenic. But once we had the genome, then you can do things really quite good. And it's given us the possibility, before you're treated for cancer, you should really look at your DNA and find out what's wrong. If we really focused our country on it, this DNA diagnosis would be available for everyone in 10 years. Instead, we're not. Money isn't being voted. No one is. We have no generals, put it that way. No generals leading the fight against cancer. And this shows you, up there, the DNA has really been badly rearranged, and if you have that sort of cancer, you're going to die. This is bad. And you probably shouldn't get chemotherapy, which will just make you sicker. So I think we can lead to a much more humane treatment of cancer if we first do DNA diagnosis. Now, last just shows me coming to Houston to be shown my 3 billion base pairs, which of course can only be done by a computer who can look at them and tell you what's wrong. And they told me I had 25 lousy genes. And so, But it really didn't frighten me because, soon I'm going to be 80, and so it's not going to affect my job, it's not going to affect my insurance. And I had told them I did not want to see my apolipoprotein E gene, just one. And that would have given prognostic advice as to whether when I reach 90, I will have Alzheimer's. So, what? They could only, I just automatically think I won't get it. So why be told otherwise? Just to sort of know my philosophy, I don't think children should be DNA sequenced at birth, even if it's cheap. I think only if you know what you're going to do with a piece of information should you get it. They told me I had a mutation which might cause me to go blind at 50. And so, in the future I should wear dark glasses. So until thousands of people are sequenced, we won't know really what the data means. I think, we sequence, but right now it costs about $1 million for my sequence. There are new methodologies which should bring it down to 100,000, I'd say by the end of this year. And my dream is the Chevrolet genome. That is, you can get your genome for the price of a Chevrolet. BMW cost, that's too much. But the medical system really can't afford it. We've got to reduce the cost down. And so we're going to be in a place where within 10 years we will really begin to, no one should go to a psychologist, without having their DNA looked at. That is not, everyone should be looked at. If you're behaving rather strange, or you're a child that's suddenly, getting bad grades in school, then I think it's worthwhile looking at the DNA before you send them to a psychologist, or psychiatrist, which have improved a little from the Nazi time, but, Eric is a psychiatrist, so he can defend them, and I know what I'm saying because of my son. I really met these people. So it's not a rather strong branch in medicine at the present time. And, I got a donor to give us $25 million saying we will work to get a DNA diagnosis of every mentally ill person in 10 years. It will take a big government push toward it at the end, but we'll start it with private money. But I think we've got to stop asking the government for money, more money, without promising some things we're going to achieve with it. And some of these things we can do. If you can do them, just do them fast, because, the parents of people with schizophrenia think scientists are working on Sunday. No, they're not working on Sunday. There's no money to work on Sunday, among other things. Also, they're not quite motivated enough. Okay, well, I'll end. You can see that we're going to get a lot of information, and probably we will, as I tell in a sort of a joking fashion, we'll find out whether the Scotch are, as many bright genes as the Irish. And, schizophrenia has terrible effects on cognition. So in studying these diseases, we're going to be drawn to these genes which affect intelligence. And so you wouldn't, when kids can't perform, then I think you look at the genes. Because you may discover they can't perform, so you shouldn't keep trying and trying and trying when, the brain won't permit it. So, trying and trying is very emotionally draining when it doesn't succeed. And it consumes vast sums of money. So we've got to do that. But it's the last thing I will say is that we've concentrated, on geneticists or psychiatrists and the leading to the end, and then plus, the Nazis, who are the real real villains. I mean, their philosophy let the psychiatrists do what they did, but that in part, the problem may be not just the people doing it, but the genes themselves. And why did the Nazis or the Christians have such nasty feeling toward Jews? And it was undoubtedly the religious difference, but I think it was envy. Jews are very competent. And when you put together being better than you and not believing in Jesus, you have an incendiary mix. I'm not urging any Jews to go to Jesus to prevent future Holocausts, but I am saying that one has to expect people to be jealous if you can do things they can't do. And so I think, when you're on top, you've got to be perceived of as helping those on the bottom. And I think that's the chief message I want to leave you with. Thank you.